The kingdom of Veyrath was a land where power and blood ruled above all else. Its rulers, the Alpha Kings, were both feared and worshipped. Every gesture, every decision, carried weight. Within the grand palace, gold and stone gleamed under the sunlight, and yet shadows clung to the corners of every hall. It was here that Leora had once walked with pride, once been the chosen mate of the Alpha King, admired and envied by all. That was before the truth of her barrenness had been revealed. Before the humiliation, Leora had been cast aside in a moment of cruel judgment. The court had whispered, the servants had stared, and the king himself had looked at her with disappointment that had cut sharper than any blade. She had left the palace with nothing but the bitter sting of rejection and the memory of what could have been. Yet, she had survived. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more determined. Her heart still bore a quiet ache, a reminder of love lost and trust broken. But it also carried a fire the king would soon regret underestimating. And now, an invitation had arrived. It was sealed with the king's emblem, a wolf's head carved in gold. The message inside was clear. Attend the pup ceremony. Witness the future heirs. Remember your place. Most would have burned the letter in shame or anger. Most would have turned away. But Leora's lips curved in a faint, controlled smile. She read the words carefully, felt the weight of the insult, and then felt a spark of defiance. They expect me to bow? To crawl back and beg? She thought. No. They will see I am not defeated. They will see dignity. She prepared herself meticulously. Her robes were dark but elegant, flowing like shadows over the palace steps. Her hair was braided and pinned in a style that spoke of nobility without arrogance. She carried herself with a quiet grace. Every step measured, every glance precise. She was ready to face the king, to face the court, and most importantly, to face the memory of the man who had once called her mate. The journey to the palace was long, winding through forests and rivers that shimmered under the early morning sun. The villagers and travelers she passed whispered at the sight of her, curious about why a woman once scorned would dare return. Leora ignored them. She had one purpose. By the time she reached the palace gates, the courtiers were already assembling. The scent of incense and polished stone filled the air, a reminder of wealth and power. Guards lined the steps, standing rigidly, their eyes flicking to Leora as she approached. Whispers rippled through the crowd, rising like the swell of an unseen tide. And then, she entered the grand hall. The hall was massive, filled with banners of silver and blue. Light streamed through towering windows, falling on the polished floor, reflecting like a river of gold. At the far end, the Alpha King sat on his throne, a figure carved from authority itself. His presence dominated the room, a mixture of strength, pride, and an unyielding will. His gaze swept over the assembled crowd, lingering briefly on Leora. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The courtiers murmured, some biting their lips to contain laughter, others holding their hands over their mouths in surprise. Leora's return was unexpected, and even more shocking was her calm, unwavering expression. She walked steadily toward the center of the hall, where the ceremony would begin, her dark robes trailing behind her like a shadow. And then she was not alone. From behind her, a small figure emerged, holding her hand tightly. A child, but not an ordinary child. There was a presence about him, a strength, a quiet intensity that drew the eyes of every noble in the hall. He walked with the confidence of one born to rule, his gaze steady, meeting the eyes of those around him without fear. The courtiers gasped. Some whispered in disbelief. The king's eyes widened, his composure cracking for the first time in years. Leora stopped a few steps before the throne. She lowered her chin, holding her gaze steady. "I am here," she said softly, her voice carrying through the hall. "I have come to witness the ceremony, and to remind all that the blood of the kingdom flows through those it chooses, not those it rejects." A hush fell. Even the guards seemed to pause, unsure if they should intervene. The king's jaw tightened. He leaned forward on his throne, the golden light of the hall catching the sharp angles of his face. Anger, pride, and something deeper, something unspoken, flickered in his eyes. Leora turned her gaze to the child beside her. He was silent, observing, aware of every whisper, every glance. She knelt slightly, bringing herself closer to his level. "Remember," she whispered, "your place is not given by titles or crowns. It is earned by courage, by choice, and by strength of heart. Never forget who you are." The king rose abruptly from his throne, his voice echoing through the hall. "How dare you return here? After everything, you—" He stopped, struggling to find words that matched his fury. "I return not for your forgiveness," Leora interrupted calmly. "I return to stand, to show that rejection does not destroy me. That choice, courage, and love endure beyond your judgment." The courtiers whispered nervously. Some admired her bravery. Others feared the consequences. The king's face darkened, his pride wounded, his ego stung by her unwavering confidence. Leora straightened, her eyes locking with his. "I come not as a broken mate. I come as one who carries a legacy you cannot erase," she said. The child stepped forward, holding out his small hand toward the king, not in submission but in acknowledgement of the truth Leora had spoken. The hall grew tense. The air itself seemed to thrum with anticipation. The courtiers leaned forward, sensing the shift in power, sensing the story of shame and redemption unfolding before their eyes. The Alpha King's voice was low, dangerous. "And who is this?" Leora met his gaze with quiet defiance. "This is the heir of Werewolf, the child of blood, courage, and choice. The child you could not deny, even if you wished to." Gasps filled the room. The king's eyes narrowed, searching the child's face for any flaw, any sign of weakness. But the boy stood firm, serene and unshaken, carrying a presence that rivaled the king's own. Leora's heart swelled with quiet pride. She had faced rejection, humiliation, and the sharp sting of loss. And yet here she stood, not broken, not defeated, but strengthened by it. The king's lips pressed into a thin line. His anger simmered, but beneath it, a new emotion stirred, something he had not felt in years. Doubt, fear, and, perhaps, the faintest trace of admiration. Leora straightened fully, her shadow stretching across the floor toward the throne. She spoke once more, her voice carrying calm authority. "You may have chosen to reject me, to mock me, and to deny what you could not see. But today, you witness what remains when dignity, courage, and heart endure. This is not your ceremony alone. Today, you witness a legacy you cannot claim to destroy." The hall fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause outside the towering windows, as if the kingdom itself held its breath. Leora and the child stood together, unyielding, facing the king who had once held her heart and shattered it. And in that moment, the Alpha King realized that his carefully constructed world, his image of control and dominance, was beginning to crumble. A new power had entered the kingdom, one he could not dictate, one he could not control. And for the first time, he felt a pang of something dangerous, fear mingled with desire, anger mingled with regret. The ceremony had not even begun. And already, the kingdom waited, watching the unfolding story of a woman scorned who had returned stronger than anyone could have imagined. Leora stood quietly, her gaze never faltering, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes upon her. She was ready for whatever came next. She had reclaimed her place, her dignity, and her strength. The king, the court, and the world would have to see her anew. The whispers grew louder, and the Alpha King's grip on the throne tightened, though his mind raced with questions he could not yet answer. The child's eyes met his, steady and fearless. Leora's presence was a challenge, a warning, and a promise. And the kingdom itself seemed to lean forward, waiting for the next move, for the next word, for the moment when fate would speak. "This is only the beginning," Leora thought, as the first notes of the ceremony began to echo through the hall. "And they will learn, all of them, that strength is never truly destroyed. The grand hall of Veyrath shone under the sunlight, its walls draped with banners that rippled gently in the soft breeze flowing from the open windows. The air was thick with the scent of polished stone and incense. The pup ceremony, an event of celebration and lineage, had begun, yet the room pulsed with an unusual tension. The court whispered constantly, their eyes flicking between the Alpha King, Leora, and the small figure beside her, the child whose presence defied expectation. The Alpha King, tall and imposing, sat rigidly upon his throne, his gaze fixed like steel on the two figures before him. His jaw tightened as he fought to maintain control, his pride wounded by the quiet authority in Leora's posture. Every eye in the hall was on her, and she did not flinch. She had returned, not as the rejected mate of a king, but as a woman who carried her own strength and the legacy of a child whose bloodline could not be denied. "Present the heirs," the king commanded, his voice cold, a sharp edge of authority slicing through the murmurs. Yet even as he spoke, his eyes betrayed hesitation. He had expected the ceremony to proceed without disruption, a show of his unchallenged power. Instead, he faced a woman who refused to bow, and a child whose very existence questioned the very foundation of his authority. Leora stepped forward gracefully, her dark robes flowing behind her, and placed the child on the ceremonial dais. The boy looked out at the court with calm awareness. He was small, yet his presence filled the room, as though the very air recognized his importance. The courtiers whispered in disbelief. Few had ever seen such a child step into the ceremony unshaken, unafraid of the Alpha King himself. "This heir," Leora said clearly, her voice echoing in the hall, "carries a lineage you cannot claim to deny. He is not only my child but a symbol of what true strength and courage endure, beyond your judgment." The Alpha King rose, the golden light catching the sharp angles of his face, his anger barely contained. "You dare show him here? In this hall?" he demanded. "After everything, you think your return, and this child, can challenge my throne?" Leora did not flinch. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "I do not come to challenge you, but to remind the kingdom that power is not only measured by the throne one sits upon. True strength is in courage, in the choices we make, and in the hearts that refuse to bow to cruelty." The courtiers were silent now, captivated by the confrontation. Some admired Leora's bravery, while others trembled at the audacity of a woman who had been publicly humiliated yet stood taller than any noble present. Even the guards, sworn to defend the king, could not hide the flicker of unease in their eyes. The child took a step forward, holding his head high. His gaze met the king's, steady and fearless. There was an undeniable force in him, a quiet command of attention that no one, not even the Alpha King, could ignore. Leora's heart swelled with pride, though she kept her expression calm. This child, born from rejection and love, carried a power that could not be denied. The king's hands clenched at his sides. Pride, anger, and something deeper, fear, warred within him. For the first time, he felt the fragile nature of control. The realization that his carefully curated image of power might be slipping. He had mocked Leora once, cast her aside, and now, standing before him, she was more formidable than he had ever imagined. The ceremony continued, yet the usual pomp felt hollow. The Alpha King attempted to maintain control, calling forth other heirs to be presented. Yet every whisper in the court returned to Leora and her child. Even the most loyal nobles could not ignore the shift in energy. The boy, small as he was, drew every gaze, as if the kingdom itself recognized the significance of his presence. A moment of unexpected quiet fell over the hall. The child raised his hand slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than submission. Light reflected in his eyes, catching the attention of every noble and guard. A soft hum, almost imperceptible, seemed to resonate from him. And for a moment, even the Alpha King felt it, a surge of something old, powerful, and untamed. Leora stepped closer to the dais, her voice low but clear. "You see him, yes? But do you understand what he carries? Not just blood, but strength. Not just life, but the will to endure. He is a reminder that no throne, no power, and no judgment can erase what is true. The king's expression darkened. He could not control this. He could not command it. The power in the boy was beyond his manipulation, beyond the limits of his understanding. For the first time, he felt the fragile boundaries of control slip through his fingers. Rage mingled with an unfamiliar pang of longing. A recognition that he had lost something greater than his pride. The bond he had once shared with Leora. Leora observed him carefully. She had anticipated his anger. But this reaction, this subtle mix of fear and something unspoken, was new. She did not retreat. She held her ground, silent but unwavering, letting the presence of the child speak for her. The Alpha King's court had expected her humiliation. Instead, they witnessed her power, her dignity, and her triumph without a word of vengeance. The other heirs were presented, but their display seemed pale in comparison. The courtiers could not tear their eyes from the child or from Leora. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who is this boy? What power does he hold? How could a rejected mate return with such strength? The king's once unquestioned authority now faced a subtle, yet unmistakable challenge. A hush fell over the hall when Leora stepped down from the dais, placing her hand gently on the child's shoulder. "Remember this day," she said softly, her eyes meeting the king's. "For it is a day the kingdom remembers, not for heirs alone, but for the courage to return, the strength to endure, and the power to reclaim dignity." The Alpha King's voice was low, almost a growl. "You return with him? To mock me? To show the court what I cannot erase?" Leora shook her head slightly, her dark hair catching the light. "I return not to mock, but to stand. And to remind you that what is true cannot be destroyed by rejection." The court gasped. Even the most loyal nobles found themselves leaning closer, uncertain how the confrontation would unfold. Every movement, every word, seemed charged with invisible electricity. The boy's calm presence amplified the tension. He was not just a child, he was a herald of change, a living testament to courage and legacy. The king's hands flexed at his sides. Pride and ego battled against this unanticipated reality. Anger, confusion, and fear mingled, leaving him uncertain for the first time in years. The ceremony, which had been meant to celebrate heirs and legacy, now became a stage for confrontation, for power, and for truths long ignored. Leora's gaze did not waver. She stepped closer to the throne, yet kept a respectful distance. "The child is not your pawn, nor am I here as your subject. We are witnesses to what endures beyond your control, beyond your judgment. Today, the kingdom sees what it truly means to survive, to endure, and to hold one's dignity." The king's throat tightened. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He had no authority over the child, and he could not break the strength that Leora radiated. His eyes, sharp and commanding as ever, softened for a fleeting moment, a recognition, painful and profound, that he had lost more than he had realized. A murmur passed through the hall. Some nobles looked away, uncomfortable with the power that challenged their own sense of order. Others leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. The boy stepped slightly, tilting his head as if sensing the attention. Yet he remained calm, steady, and composed. Leora placed her hand on the child's shoulder once more, and whispered words meant only for him. "Stand tall. They may try to judge, to mock, or to diminish you. But strength and courage cannot be taken by force. Remember who you are." The Alpha King's fingers curled around the arms of his throne. Pride battled with the quiet pangs of realization. He had rejected Leora for her barrenness, not realizing that legacy could take many forms, not only through heirs, but through courage, will, and love that endured beyond his control. And then, as the ceremony continued, the child's presence seemed to ripple outward, touching the nobles, the guards, and even the king himself. Whispers spread. "The boy is not ordinary. There is something about him." The king's eyes met Leora's once more. In that silent exchange, he saw defiance, dignity, and the unbroken spirit of a woman he had once loved and discarded. For the first time, he wondered not about heirs, not about legacy, but about the choices he had made, and the life he had lost in the process. Leora stepped back, letting the ceremony continue. Yet the tension remained. Electric. Palpable. The kingdom had witnessed not just an heir, but a quiet revolution of dignity and courage. The Alpha King had been challenged in a way he could not anticipate. And for the first time in years, the weight of uncertainty pressed upon him. This ceremony will not end as I planned, he thought, his gaze lingering on Leora and the child. And perhaps that is only the beginning. The hall echoed with the sound of ceremonial music, the clatter of nobles taking their places, and whispers of awe and disbelief. But at the heart of it all, the Alpha King realized a truth he could not ignore. The balance of power had shifted, and the story of rejection and return was only just beginning. The ceremony had ended, but the tension it left behind lingered in every corner of the palace. Courtiers whispered among themselves, uncertain what they had witnessed. Some admired Leora's courage, others feared the subtle shift of power she represented. And at the heart of it all, the Alpha King paced in his private chambers, his thoughts as turbulent as the storm clouds gathering outside. He had faced many challenges in his life: rebellions, rival clans, and supernatural threats, but nothing had unsettled him like the quiet strength of Leora and the child she carried. His mind replayed her words over and over, her calm defiance, her unwavering gaze. Pride and anger warred with something unfamiliar. Regret. He had discarded her, believed her powerless. And yet here she was, stronger than ever, standing not as a mate, but as a force he could not control. Leora, meanwhile, remained in the guest chambers, watching over the child who slept peacefully. She had been careful to maintain her dignity throughout the ceremony, but the effort to keep her composure had left her exhausted. Still, she felt a quiet triumph. She had returned not to humiliate, not to challenge the king for vengeance, but to reclaim her voice, her legacy, and her child's place in the kingdom. The child stirred in his sleep, reaching for her hand. Leora smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Rest," she whispered. "You have done enough for today. The world will watch, but you are stronger than their doubts." Outside her door, a soft knock echoed. Leora's body tensed. She had anticipated this moment, but that did not make it easier. "Enter," she said cautiously. The Alpha King stepped in, his presence commanding even in the quiet of the room. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand. He simply stood, hands clasped behind his back, studying her. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with recognition. This was the man she had once loved, the man who had rejected her, and yet he seemed unguarded, fragile even, in a way she had never seen. "You left," he began, his voice low, almost cautious. Leora did not flinch. She met his gaze calmly. "I returned, because strength cannot remain hidden forever. You cannot undo what is true, no matter how much you wish to." The king walked closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You show me a child I cannot control, a presence I cannot command, and a strength I cannot bend. Do you know what that does to a king?" His voice was quieter now, tinged with something like awe, or perhaps regret. "I know what it does to a man," Leora replied softly. "It makes him face what he cannot change, and it makes him see the truth he has long ignored." The Alpha King's expression hardened, yet the words lingered between them, unspoken and weighty. He had spent years believing that control equaled power, that authority could bend hearts and erase mistakes. But now, standing before Leora, he realized how fragile such illusions were. Strength was not a throne, power was not domination. Courage, dignity, and love, those were the forces that endured beyond judgment. The child stirred again, half awake. Leora moved to cradle him, her hands gentle but firm. The king watched, his emotions in turmoil. He remembered holding her once, feeling a connection he had not understood until it was gone. Now he watched as she held their child, steady, protective, and radiant in her quiet authority. A pang of longing cut through his pride. "You've changed," he said finally, his voice low. "And I don't know how to face that." Leora's eyes softened, but her posture remained strong. "I have changed because I had no choice. I endured what you could not see, what you chose to ignore. But I have not forgotten." The king's jaw tightened. "And yet, here you are, standing before me, unbroken, defiant, commanding attention, while I feel powerless." "You are not powerless," she replied. "You are just realizing that control is not everything, that some things, love, courage, legacy, cannot be commanded." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Outside, the wind whispered through the palace towers, and the distant sound of the kingdom carrying on reminded them both that life continued, indifferent to personal struggles. The Alpha King stepped closer still, close enough that the warmth of his presence brushed against hers. "Do you regret anything?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Losing me?" Leora met his gaze steadily. "Regret is a strange thing," she said. "I do not deny the pain. I felt it, but I do not live in regret. I live in what I have become." The king's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to argue, to assert control, to demand obedience, but he found himself powerless against the quiet storm of her words. And beneath the anger, a deeper, quieter feeling stirred. The recognition that he had misjudged her, that he had failed not only her but himself. The child stirred again, eyes opening to the dim light of the room. He looked at the king, then at Leora, then back at the king, as though testing the boundaries of authority and courage. The king knelt slowly, his face softening as he met the boy's gaze. He had never seen such calm, such presence in one so young. "You are strong," the king said quietly to the child. "Stronger than I expected." The child's eyes remained steady, unwavering, as if measuring the truth of those words. Leora watched the exchange, feeling a mix of pride and cautious hope. She had prepared for confrontation, for anger, for shame, but this moment was different. It was not a battle of dominance, but an encounter of truths long ignored. The king rose, his hands still tense, and took a slow step back. "You have made me realize something," he said, his voice low. "I cannot control what I once cast aside. I cannot erase what is true. And I cannot ignore the courage it took for you to return." Leora inclined her head slightly. "Then see it, truly. See what you once rejected, and perhaps never understood. And learn from it. Strength is not given. It is forged. Courage is not commanded. It is earned." For a moment, the room held its breath. Outside, the wind grew louder, rustling banners and casting shadows on the stone walls. Within the quiet chamber, two hearts, once broken, once divided, stood facing each other. The tension was not just between past and present, but between pride and humility, anger and forgiveness, regret and hope. The Alpha King's voice softened further. I do not know if I can make this right," he admitted. "I do not know if I can reclaim what was lost." "You do not have to reclaim it," Leora said gently. "You only have to see it, respect it, and learn from it. The rest is a choice, one that must come from within, not from fear or pride." He fell silent, grappling with the weight of her words. The child stirred again, reaching for her hand. She took it, guiding him gently back to sleep. The king watched, feeling the subtle shift of power and understanding. He had ruled by strength, by fear, by control, but here, in this quiet room, he realized that authority alone could not touch the deepest truths of the heart. "You have changed me," the king said finally, his voice almost reverent. "And I do not yet know what that means for me, or for us." Leora met his gaze steadily. Then let that be your journey. Let us see what strength, courage, and truth can build, not from fear or judgment, but from choice and heart. A long silence followed. Outside, the palace seemed to exhale, the weight of the ceremony's tension lifting slightly, leaving only quiet reflection. For the first time in years, the Alpha King felt uncertain not of his power, but of his place in a world that had shifted beyond his control. Leora took a slow step back, her hand still resting lightly on the child's shoulder. "We will face what comes," she said softly, "together, in courage and truth. Not because you command it, but because it is right." The king nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. There was anger still, pride still, but beneath it lay something new. The first seeds of respect, understanding, and perhaps the possibility of redemption. Outside the door, the wind whispered against the stone walls, carrying the echoes of the kingdom's expectations, its power, and its legacy. Inside, two hearts once torn by rejection and pain stood facing truths long denied. The stage was set for what must come next: confrontation, choice, and transformation. And in that quiet chamber, Leora felt it too, a shift in the balance of power, a promise that the story was far from over. She had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her child's legacy. And the Alpha King, for all his pride and power, had been forced to confront the consequences of his choices and the depth of his own heart. The air was thick with possibility, danger, and quiet hope. And as the first shadows of evening fell over the palace towers, both knew that what came next would test them all in ways the kingdom had never seen. The dawn broke over the kingdom of Veyrath like a promise, casting light over the grand palace and the sprawling courtyards below. The previous day's ceremony had left the court unsettled, whispers running like wildfire among nobles and guards alike. They had expected spectacle, tradition, and celebration, but instead, they had witnessed defiance, dignity, and a child who carried a power that no throne could claim. In the throne room, the Alpha King paced slowly. His thoughts were heavy with the events of the past hours. Pride, anger, and lingering regret wove through his mind, each tugging at him with equal weight. He had ruled for decades, feared by allies and enemies alike. Yet never had he faced a challenge like this: a woman he had rejected, standing firm, and a child whose presence demanded respect rather than fear. Leora entered the throne room, the child walking beside her, steady and calm. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of one who had endured pain and emerged stronger. Every eye followed her. Every whisper halted at the edge of respect and awe. She did not approach the king with humility or apology. She approached with truth, dignity, and the authority of someone who had survived rejection and hardship. The king looked at her, and then at the child. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady, but heavy with emotion. "You have returned, not as I expected, but as someone I cannot dismiss. You have forced me to see what I refuse to acknowledge. That strength and courage do not bow to ego or decree." Leora's eyes met his calmly. "You see it now," she said, "not because I commanded it, not because you chose to, but because it is true. The child and I are not here to challenge you. We are here to remind the kingdom of what endures courage, choice, and heart." The child stepped forward slightly, tilting his head toward the king. There was a quiet power in him, a presence that radiated calm authority beyond his years. The Alpha King knelt slowly before him, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than submission. Recognizing that the boy carried a legacy of strength and courage, one that could not be dictated or controlled. "You are strong," the king said softly, voice almost reverent. "Stronger than I could have imagined. You remind me of what I have ignored, what I failed to see." Leora watched carefully, noting the subtle shifts in the king's demeanor. She had prepared for confrontation, for anger, for continued rejection. Yet here, in this quiet moment, she saw the first flickers of understanding, of humility, and perhaps the beginnings of redemption. "Strength is not given by titles or thrones," she said gently. "It is forged by endurance, courage, and choice. Respect it, and you will see the world as it truly is. Deny it, and you will only face the consequences of your pride." The king rose slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He had spent his life commanding, controlling, and ruling. Yet now he realized that power alone could not touch the deepest truths of the heart. Leora had taught him this, not with words alone, but with presence, dignity, and the quiet authority of a woman who had survived rejection and returned stronger than anyone could have imagined. The courtiers, watching in hushed silence, sensed the shift. The king's authority remained, but it was tempered now by humility, by recognition of strength beyond his control. The child, standing beside Leora, represented a new legacy, one not built solely on fear or dominance, but on courage, heart, and choice. The king finally spoke again, voice steadier but softer. "I have wronged you," he admitted. "I allowed my pride to blind me, to cast aside someone I should have honored. And now I see the truth of what I lost, and what I allowed to grow beyond my control." Number 5. Number 5. Number 5. Number 5. Also. Number 5. Number 5. Leora inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his words without softening her own resolve. "Acknowledgement is the first step," she said. "The rest is choice. What you do now defines the man you will become, not the one who erred in the past." He walked closer, hesitating as though unsure how to bridge the distance between them. "And what of us?" he asked quietly. "What place is there for what we once were, and what we could be now?" Leora met his gaze firmly. "There is no place for what we once were. Only for what we choose to build together. If we choose at all. Strength and courage cannot be demanded, only respected. Love cannot be commanded, only given freely. That choice is yours as much as mine." The child looked up at both of them, small hands clutching Leora's robe, his expression calm yet aware. The king knelt before him again, this time reaching out slowly, letting the boy's gaze meet his. The room held its breath. The boy's acceptance, quiet and deliberate, was a sign that the past had not erased him, that the future was still open and full of possibility. "You have shown me the consequences of pride," the king said softly, voice thick with emotion, "and the meaning of courage. You and he, you have forced me to see what I could not before. Perhaps it is not too late to learn from it." Quote, Leora allowed herself a small, controlled smile. "It is never too late to learn," she said. "But it is too late to cling to what does not serve the truth. Change begins when one acknowledges both mistakes and the strength of others. That is where redemption starts." The king's hands clenched slightly, then relaxed. For decades, he had ruled with dominance and control. Now, standing before Leora and the child, he realized that true power was not about fear or command, but about recognition, respect, and humility. And perhaps if he was brave enough about forgiveness and choice, then let this be a new beginning, he said finally. For you, for him, and for the man I must become. Leora nodded slowly. "A new beginning is always possible," she said. "But it is not given lightly. It must be earned, through courage, honesty, and the strength to face what comes." Outside the throne room, the court watched silently. The atmosphere was electric, yet subdued with respect. They had witnessed not only the confrontation of pride and defiance, but the emergence of something greater. The possibility of change, redemption, and a legacy that could not be defined by fear alone. The child stepped closer to the king, small hands extended in a gesture of acknowledgement, trust, and quiet authority. The king reached out slowly, allowing their hands to meet. The touch was brief but heavy with meaning, a bond not of submission, but of recognition, respect, and shared destiny. Leora's eyes softened as she observed them. This was not the end of their journey, nor the end of trials to come, but it was a turning point, a moment where past mistakes were faced, courage was honored, and hearts began to reconcile. The kingdom had witnessed the power of endurance, dignity, and love that could not be commanded or destroyed. The Alpha King straightened, turning his gaze to the assembled court. "Let it be known," he said, voice firm and clear, "that true strength lies not in thrones alone, but in courage, dignity, and heart. Today, we witness a legacy that cannot be denied, one built not by fear, but by truth and choice." Whispers spread through the hall. But this time, they were not of doubt or mockery. They were whispers of awe, respect, and recognition. Leora had returned, not broken, not defeated, but as a force that commanded honor and admiration. The child beside her represented a new era, one where courage and choice mattered as much as lineage and power. The king stepped forward, finally closing the distance between himself and Leora. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect and humility, acknowledging not only her strength but the courage it had taken to return. "I cannot undo the past," he said softly, "but I can face it, and I can strive to be worthy of what you and he have brought into this kingdom." Leora inclined her head. "That is all anyone can ask," she said gently, "and it is more than many ever achieve. The rest will follow. In time." Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke fully across the palace, glinting off banners, marble, and gold. It was a new day for the kingdom of Werewolf, a day marked not just by airs and ceremony, but by courage, reconciliation, and the promise of change. The Alpha King, Leora, and the child stood together, a silent yet powerful image of what could be achieved when pride was tempered with humility, when courage was honored, and when hearts faced the truth. And though challenges would still come, this moment, the recognition of strength, the acknowledgement of choice, the quiet triumph of dignity, would stand as the foundation of what the future might hold. Leora placed a hand on the child's shoulder, and together, they faced the king. The tension of the past had been confronted. The path ahead remained uncertain, but the bonds forged in courage, truth, and respect had shifted the course of their lives forever. The kingdom had witnessed not just a ceremony, but the transformation of hearts. And as the Alpha King met Leora's gaze once more, he understood something he had never before admitted. True power lies not in domination, but in the courage to face one's own heart and to honor the strength of others. The court, the kingdom, and the palace itself seemed to exhale, leaving silence filled with possibility, hope, and the promise of a legacy built on courage, dignity, and choice. This was the beginning of a new era, and for the first time, the Alpha King, Leora, and the child would face it together, not as master and subject, nor as broken hearts, but as a family united by truth, courage, and the enduring bonds of the heart.